Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the inaugural podcast, Stuck in the Middle. My name is Palan and I'm from the University of Cyberjaya. In a journey of over 40 years as a manager and an entrepreneur, I've always found myself in ambivalent situations, taking a stand. The famous British Prime Minister, Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, once made a statement. If you stand in the middle of a road, stuck in the middle, you run the risk of getting hit by a car. So here we are in this podcast exploring divergent views with eminent panelists. Fareed Zakaria, the US columnist, once remarked in his book, The 10 Lessons for a Post-Pandemic World. He said, we don't have a dilemma today, we have a trilemma. And he borrowed a concept from the computer networks where he said, out of the three characteristics, open, fast, and stable, you could only have two. If it's open and fast, the computer network is highly unlikely to be stable. So he said, we could only have that. So in a world that's facing not a dilemma, but a trilemma, here we are looking at the post-pandemic world and looking at a divergent topic. We are looking at psychology, but psychology here today, we look at the psychology of money. Let's decode the psychology of money for the next 50 minutes. If psychology is intriguing, so is money. Money is far more intriguing. And so how do we understand the psychology of money? A couple of months ago, I had my niece who was a medical doctor, Dr. Alagu, who came up to me and gifted me this lovely book, award-winning book by Morgan Housel, The Psychology of Money. The Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel narrates to us 19 short stories talking to us about 19 basic concepts. So what does he say? He primarily says the psychology of money is not about how smart you are, but how well we behave with money. And that's the key theme of the message throughout the 19 chapters in the book. Money is everywhere, it affects everyone, it confuses everyone. And fortunately or unfortunately, everyone sees money from different perspectives. Let's go to the book. Financial success, he says, is not how smart you are. It's not how good you are on the Excel spreadsheet. It's not about maths-based models. He says it's about psychology and history. And therefore, he says we need to teach people how to behave with money. And his conclusion is that it's virtually difficult, impossible sometimes, to teach very educated people how to behave with money. The key takeaways from award-winning author Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money, he shares 19 short stories based on 19 concepts. And that's the takeaway. He primarily tries to teach us how to make better sense of one of most important resources in life, that's money. So is investment easy? No, not at all. But is it difficult? No, neither. To understand financial success and failure, we need to understand through the lenses of psychology and history, not mathematics. To understand why people get into debt, we don't need to think through rising interest rates or inflation, but we need to understand optimism, greed, and fear. All of it is primarily going to be not Excel spreadsheets, but emotional decisions. And I think it's important for us to understand that most financial decisions are made impulsively. They're made emotionally. We see something, we got a credit card, and we quickly swipe the card and just go and buy something. It's an emotional decision. And I think it's important to understand that wealth is what remains after what you have brought in and what you have spent. And that's the key. So you can only spend money that you have, not spend money that you don't have. Today, in an information-driven world, information is no longer an age, but controlling your impulses is definitely, most certainly, an age. We always talk about, on hindsight, if only I had made that investment, if only I had bought that property, if only I had done that. And remember the famous quote, life can only be understood backwards, but it has to be lived forwards. And that's what the psychology of money teaches us or gives us a sense of what to do into the future. And what is a priority to us has to be lived. Our decision making has to reflect priorities. But most of us recognize that this is a lifetime practice. We don't make decisions which are our life priorities. We just are very impulsive, and that's something that's important. And money's greatest intrinsic value is financial freedom, time. Time is a limited resource, and so when you have the time at your disposal, you could do whatever you want. Morgan Housel says investing is a long-term endeavor. There's no shortcuts to success. And he explains this through and through the 19 chapters. So in this podcast, we will look at 3 key areas, and we will have our eminent panelists share their views on these 3 key ideas. Idea number 1, financial success is a soft skill. It's not how smart you are, but how you behave with it. Number 2, people's view of money is based on their own life experiences. Number 3, how do we get to financial freedom even if we find life challenges are very severe? How do we achieve financial freedom? So today on our podcast, we have 2 panelists. We can't get any better to get the diversity of thought. Ms. Sarah Lian, entrepreneur, television presenter, more importantly, an accomplished master of ceremonies. Name it anything in the world of public relations, she's there. And more importantly, she empowers women with tools to succeed in life. And she created Super Good to achieve that mission. On the other hand, we have, as you can see him, you will know that he's a millennial. He's a millennial entering into the adult world, as he says in his blog. And if you listen to any of his podcasts or webinars, you'll be amazed. Number 1, he says he never got any money from his parents. And number 2, he says there are 3 pillars: making money, saving money, investing money. And he says he is a millennial who is out there to show investing and saving money is doable. So before we pose the first idea that I want to discuss on this podcast, why do we think that enough is not enough for most people? Number 2, why do financial consultants tell us to save every month when it's even difficult to survive each month? And number 3, how can we avoid the emotional impulses to buy when credit cards are easily available? Just before I leave it to our panelists to kind of discuss and debate these questions, I want to just share one story from the book. And this is a very important story that comes right at the beginning of the book. And the story is about Ronald James Reed, entrepreneur, philanthropist, investor, janitor, and a gas attendant. He worked as a gas attendant for 25 years, as a janitor for 17 years, married married at the age of 38, bought a house at 38, and lived in that same house till he died at the age of 92. Married his school sweetheart, widowed at 50, never remarried again. And it's an amazing story of this person. First generation graduate who hiked to college, walked 4 miles to school, and yet when he died at the age of 92 in 2014, his net worth in the United States of America was estimated to be 8 million US dollars. From statistics, in the United States of America, in 2014, only about 4,000 Americans were estimated to be net worth, I mean net worth, of 8 million US dollars. How did he do it? A janitor? A gas attendant? How did he do it? Did he win a lottery? No, he didn't win a lottery. He just saved as much as he could, and he invested as much as he could, and he waited patiently for the power of compounding to take effect. And when he died, he donated 6 million to his local charities and 2 million to his stepkids. This was a success story. But at about the same time, there was a story of Richard Fuscon, an MBA working in the highly esteemed Merrill Lynch financial services firm, retired at the age of 40, claimed to be a philanthropist, had a couple of flashy cars, couple of garages, couple of swimming pools, couple of houses, and he soon found his extravagant spending eat into his personal investments and savings. 2008 financial crisis comes by and he's crushed and he's declared bankrupt. So what separates these two people? One, a janitor, another highly accomplished financial executive working in Merrill Lynch. It's simply patience. One was patient and one was greedy. And all it took to eclipse the advantage of education and experience that the financial services executive had over the janitor was this simple story. And I share this story from the book because this is something that we come across every day in our lives. Now, we like to leave these questions to our panelist, Sarah. Why are people just not content enough? Why is enough not enough? One, and I'll just throw in a couple of questions because you're a television personality and you'll be able to deal with it. Why are we told to save every month when, I find it difficult to make ends meet? And number three, how can I avoid that emotional impulse to go and buy something that I like? I just see this lovely dress in the mall. Oh, it looks beautiful. I don't have the money, but I have the credit card. Sarah.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction earlier. And I love what you said that, interest rates will go up and down, but really it's the behavior of someone. And what I resonate with that, why I resonate with that is that a lot of us come from a place of lack. As you were comparing both guys, one's an investment banker, one's a janitor, there's a lot of ego on one side, right? And what does your ego do? Your ego tells you you need this, you need that, you need to make sure that your status is seen, you need to be seen at this place, you need to look a certain way. And when you come from a place of lack, you need these materialistic things in order to validate who you are inside. You're going to go seek for those things. And so with the work that I've done before, and as you so kindly said, helping women succeed in life, is really to ask the questions underneath. Why do I need all of these things, right? A car is a car. Why does it have to be a flashy Lamborghini, or can it just be a Kanchil, right? These are the questions we kind of ask ourselves. And for me, it's so important to really get to the bottom of it, to ask these things that will help you figure out who you are. And I think also, it is very easy to just, put the credit card over and all of that. But I feel like a lot of it is really what's bubbling underneath, because once you feel that you are enough, that you are worth it, that you are worthy, you don't really seek validation elsewhere. You're not really looking at anything elsewhere. I mean, I'm not saying that saving isn't good or investing isn't good. I mean, you're going to do it because obviously, everybody wants to accumulate wealth. But the reason of why we do it is going to be very different, and that's going to definitely change our behaviors.
Thank you, Sarah. So ego?
Ego is a huge part. Lack.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Lack and validation. Okay, that car validates who you are. When I was young, I used to love the Lamborghini. Yeah, whether it was amazing until you too.
Yeah.
Okay. But I got to a point when I couldn't afford it at that time. But I got to a point when I could afford it. But unfortunately, I couldn't get into the car and get out of the car. It took me a long time to get in and get out. And so I just gave up. So I think this is what you say in your blogs. I think in your website you say self-worth is from here. It's not about something that's materialistic.
Absolutely. It is an inward journey that you have with yourself. You're not alone when you have yourself. And when you're able to really ask those questions and really understand the crux of it, how you grew up, trauma, what wasn't given to you, how you tried to replace that with other things. I mean, these are huge factors that basically condition or carve out who you are meant to be or who you end up becoming. And the closer you get to your own truth, the faster the realization that, I don't need all of these things. And I think for my own personal journey of, just getting through life and the hardships and the ebbs and flows, as a lot of these things started to peel away, I started to notice I didn't really need all these things anymore. I could be fine going on social media with umpteen followers and not really wear makeup and not feel like, oh no, they're going to see that I look a certain way. I mean, that part wasn't important to me anymore. And I think that's the journey, really.
So how do you teach someone? Because, driving a Lamborghini is, of course, much better than driving a Kanchen,
Is, yeah.
And, the optics of an Asian society particularly, if you drive a Lamborghini, it doesn't, of course, he talks about that, the man in the car paradox in the book. The man in the car paradox is someone drives a Ferrari or a Porsche or a Lamborghini, no one knows how much money they owe the bank. Yeah, and of course they come by and then they throw the key to the valet, and of course it's like what you're saying, those are signs of me validating myself. But how do you teach someone that it's not important? It's about who you are. It's not because we'll see later on people have different experiences in life, but how do you teach someone?
I think everyone has their own personal journey. I don't think it's anyone's job or anyone's responsibility to teach someone. I think the only thing that you can have is to share your own gifts and what is true to who you are. And if that person resonates with that in that moment, in that time, and decides to get curious, and if they're watching his videos and they're like, oh, I really want to get into investing, or that's when their learning starts.
So we have to enable the learning.
Yes. Enable the environment, create the safety, create that curiosity, allow them to play, allow them to discover. All of these elements allow people to really feel safe enough to ask questions that maybe have been very difficult in life.
It's interesting. We have a huge psychology faculty at the University of Cyberjaya, and everybody keeps talking about ego and how do you manage it, and people talk about self-esteem, people talk about positive psychology, but I think I like that one word that he used, it's validation. Yeah, so how do you get comfortable with a safety network, so that you feel comfortable to say that that's not important, but it's who I am. Well, thank you, Sarah, for those comments. Edly,
thank you for...
So how would you see it from a millennial perspective?
So the first question of why is enough never enough for us? I think I'll split it into two reasons. I think on the personal level, fundamentally, human beings are creatures of comparison, right? We were built to look at other people, what other people have, and want or compare ourselves, our situation to theirs. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing. It is just inherent in us psychologically throughout our evolution. So that's one thing. And when we combine that with our current environment right now, we're in a consumerist world where spending and showing that you're spending and you have assets or assets, quote unquote, is something that people look up to. So when you combine these two factors, where we are creatures of comparison, and what we are comparing is not how much compassion or empathy or wisdom we have, but how much materials and how much we can show off. So I think these two factors are the main reason why enough is not enough. Enough will never be enough for us because that's what makes us fundamentally human. But the direction in which we are moving towards what we want to fill whole in us is, in my opinion, a materialist direction that will not serve us very well in the long term. So the next question is, what do we do about it as individuals? Well, the first thing is to be aware of this. And when you realize that what you want is shaped by what other people think you should want or what other people have, then you will have at least that base level of awareness to start searching for what you actually think is enough for you and what you think you can have to have a fulfilling life.
Yeah, in your blog you talk about saving, yeah? So how do you save when you can make ends meet? Life is already bad enough, can't even survive. The chicken price has gone over the roof, can't, even if I'm willing to pay for the chicken, can't get the chicken. So how do you save? And you keep asking people to invest in ASB or ASM, but how do I invest, when there isn't enough to go by each month?
Right. So for the saving part, I think first we go for sardine instead of chicken and kangkong instead of chicken. So that's one tip. But I think that there are two truths to this, right? So you mentioned just now financial consultants telling us we should save, but at the same time we don't have enough. We never feel like enough. Sure. So we can dissect this into two parts as well. The first being, I've been there in a situation where it just seems like it's not enough to save. You don't have anything you don't have any excess resources to save up. But at the same time, the objective of saving, or when you tell people to save, they think about, I need to save this amount. The amount becomes the objective instead of the actual behavior or the act of saving itself. So even if you are struggling to get by every month, I could say you could probably save 0.5% of your income, 1% of your income, something small. So that behavior of saving and the act of saving itself is what reinforces this habit in you that will be beneficial to you later on when you have that money. So when you're putting aside money for yourself, when you're saving money, you're telling yourself, my future is important to me. My family's future is important to me, maybe more important than it is now. So I'm going to put aside at least something. So that behavior and that mindset is really what is important when it comes to saving, not so much the amount, because it starts there.
It's a habit.
It's a habit.
It's a habit, yeah. And one of the most interesting stories, again, from the book, which really hit me is, I know Barack Obama, the former president of the United States of America, will always say, modern capitalism did two things, the pros. One is generated wealth, and number two, it generated envy. Right? It generated wealth and it generated envy. And there's this guy, the founder of this famous company called Vanguard, John Bogle, yeah. John Bogle was very successful, but one day somebody came up to him and said, hey, John, you know something? Your pal, Heller, has made more money trading stocks as a day trader in one day than you ever did in 1 year. And John Bogle said, yeah, but I have something that he doesn't have. And so this guy said, well, what the heck do you have that he doesn't have? And he responded apparently very nicely, and he said, well, I have enough. He will never have enough. And so I think one of the things that Morgan Housel says in this book is, look, please make sure that life is fun only when you have a sense of enough. And what is happiness is results minus expectations. So some people go up to Las Vegas, and you see when they go into Las Vegas, you could see their faces kind of beaming. Or when someone goes up to Genting, they are so excited. And everybody's hoping to do what? To win, right? Everybody's hoping to win. But Morgan Housel says the only way you're going to win in Las Vegas or Genting is to get out as soon as you enter. Yeah, there's no other way you're going to win. Yeah. So, saving is a habit, and it can be inculcated in families, right? And I think you bring this habit and this psychology in and every day. But he also says that don't interrupt that saving habit. And I think in one conversation I had with Sarah said, it's priorities in life. We make sure what is important to us and we think long term. And that's why he says investment is a long-term endeavor, not something that's short-term. Well, thank you for your comments, and I would just like to move on to the second idea that we would like to go through in this podcast, Stuck in the Middle. People learn different lessons about money based on individual experience. And does it matter how you value money, or how do the rich and the poor see money? How do men and women see money? The person who grew up in poverty thinks about risks and rewards in many different ways that the son or the daughter of a wealthy banker or industrialist or politician can ever imagine, even if they try to. The experiences are different. The young person who never experienced recession, economic recession, will never understand the effects of economic recession, unlike the person who's gone through it. Or a person who lived in mainland China in the 60s will think about money differently than the person today in prosperous China. Or Indra Nooyi, the former chairman of PepsiCo, in her book My Life in Full, says she left India to the United States of America with $500. I don't think any young kid today from India leaves with $500. My own experience when I graduated from university, I think I probably applied for about 1,500 jobs till I got one job. The reason was simple. Jobs were scarce, the economy was difficult, and it was virtually impossible to get a job. Experiences were very, very different for each of us. But it's interesting that people do crazy things with money. So someone goes to Las Vegas or Genting, what they do with money is crazy. But it doesn't mean that they are crazy, right? Yeah. And I think if you look at some examples, we can go and say, look, all of us, because we go through certain experiences, the person in mainland China in the 60s or in India in the 50s or 60s, they've all had some experiences. And using these experiences, they tell stories to themselves what and why they are doing is appropriate. So just like the person going to Las Vegas or going to Genting. I had a relative, and I always kind of relate to him the story of lottery tickets. You buy lottery or you buy numbers. Different countries have got different forms of gambling. I've always been surprised, and if you look at statistics, it's not the rich people who buy these things, it's the poor people who buy, and these poor people are always from the lower income segment, yeah? And they continue to buy, and I had this relative of mine who would actually spend 1,000 ringgit every month on lottery tickets or numbers. But if you asked him to save money, he would say, look, I don't have enough money to save. So one day I said, look, it's insane. And then he said, look, Palan, based on your experience, it could be insane, but not on mine. Because I have the opportunity to 1 in a million chance to strike the lottery. And that's the crazy things that people do with money. And people buy cars, and we have seen that example time and again, and then the car is pulled back by the finance company because the person is not able to pay the installments, or something happens personal in life. So I just wanted to ask both of you this simple question. We have had a crisis, a pandemic crisis, and it's been rough 2 years. Some people had it really rough. Some businesses went out of business and some succeeded. The government did all that they could do to support. They allowed us to withdraw the EPF. So my question today is this. The concept of retirement and social security is something new, but the EPF is to put some money away for the rainy day. So how do we try to adjust people's experiences to the current reality? Because people learn from their own experiences and from their own context. But the world has changed. The world has moved on. A millennial will never understand what a baby boomer experienced. And I don't think I'll be able to understand what a millennial goes through. And I think there's enough literature out there to say men view money different and women see it differently. So the question is, how do we get people to kind of understand money in the right perspective, even though they've gone through different perspectives? Edly.
So like Sarah said just now, everyone has their own journey, right? And I believe that the best way to teach people is to be a role model yourself. And so, for example, for me, someone at my age, having achieved what I achieved, I would like to see myself as a role model for people my age, people who went to school with me, and would see, hey, this guy wasn't anything special. I probably beat him in a soccer match or got better grades than him, but here he is now. And I think that as in my position, it's also my responsibility to be authentic to who I am and genuine, so that I show these people like there's nothing really special about me. I'm just like you. I went to the same school as you, and I had the same upbringing with you, almost the same. And so I think if you want, the best way to really teach people, because I feel like when you can only teach someone when the student is ready, right? And as a teacher, I'm sure you have this experience managing your business, is that you have to strike the balance between telling people what they need to hear and them figuring it out for themselves. Because when you tell it to them, it's just, their parents tell them things all the time. But when they figure it out themselves, when they come to their own conclusions themselves, that's when they really stick to it and put it into their identity. So I think the best way is to be the person that you think you would need help, like you would ask for help. So the reason why I made videos about money is because I wish that as a younger person, I had someone to teach me these things. And so, yeah, I do believe that the best way is just to be a role model yourself and just to be understanding and just guide people and help them come to these conclusions.
And show people that this can happen. Yeah, because people sometimes say it just can't happen, but you show people it can happen by being a role model and by being an example. Yeah. Right. The next question before we go to Sarah. So do you think the government did the right thing to let people withdraw the EPF?
Oh, we have to go on another podcast for this. I think it's a hard decision for the government to make, because from a government's perspective, your interest is to keep your office, is to remain in office. And as a government, you would want your citizens to be able to have the independent capacity to choose what they want to do with their money, right? You don't want to be an overreaching arm into their personal lives as a parent. Like, they're adults and they can make their own decisions. So I think it's a very hard decision for the government to make, and I'm sure they consulted all their consultants on it. And whether or not it was the right decision, it was the decision that the government thought it would be most beneficial in their interest, while at the same time not infringing or like not upsetting people.
Yeah, there were very strong divergent views. People were stuck in the middle. One said, no, this is a retirement fund and you can touch it, and we're probably going to have a long-term social problem. And some said, well, if you didn't have, what long-term are you talking about? I can't even survive in the short term. And I'm always reminded about Jeff Immelt, what he said, the former chairman of General Electric. He said the job always looks easy when someone else is doing it. Yeah, it always looks easy. It's interesting, during the pandemic crisis, some businesses were completely gone, particularly the retail industry. And some businesses did well, like the glove industry. But the most important thing to realize is the government put in so much money in the 2 years that they had done in the last 40 years. And so much technology progress took place in that 2 years, and we always believe in the University of Cyberjaya. All of a sudden we found that we had a campus for 10,000 students and nobody was there. Only 10 of us were there, and we had to go online. And Satya Nadella, the chairman of Microsoft, says 2 years of progress took place in 3 weeks. And therefore we all had to adjust, not forgetting that people had things to do and people couldn't do things to do that they wanted to do. Well, thank you, Edly. Sarah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just would like to echo what he said. I think when people are ready, then they will learn. And I think one of the most important things that I learned, and through my workshops and platform that I've created, I got in a lady to talk about wealth. The relationship that women have with money is always my dad's looking after it, my husband, my partner. And I really wanted to empower women to take things in their own hands, whether it's emotionally, financially, mentally, physically, whatnot. So when we looked at our finances and, even really basic things like, what is your net worth? One of the questions was, how much do you want, what are you going to retire with? Right? When do you want to retire, and how much are you going to need by the time when you do decide to retire? And as we're all calculating, we're like, oh my goodness, we're going to have to make this much money, and if we want to retire early, you're going to have to be able to accumulate a lot more wealth, which means your current job or your current career, you need to find other ways of passive income or investments or anything that's going to be able to compound so that you will have that level of security. And that was a big wake-up call for a lot of people. I think even just understanding, actually, how much money am I putting into my loans, my house, my car, or maybe if I've got student loans, how much of that, what's it, debt ratio? Debt ratio, yeah. Clearly I'm not a finance person. How much of my income is going towards that? And thinking, oh my goodness, it's not sustainable. And so, the pandemic happens. It's a huge catalyst for a lot of us to really confront our own lives, our current living situation, our lifestyles. And it gets to a point where push comes to shove, you've got to do something. If you're a young parent, you got to feed your kid, you got to feed your baby. And if you don't have any money and the government's saying, hey, we've got EPF, you can now dip into that, I don't blame them. But I do understand, I definitely echo what you're saying in terms of this is probably a really tough decision that the government had to make. However, it was a choice, and that in anything that you do, even as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a boss, or someone that's even, educating other people, the whole idea is to empower people to make those decisions. I can't go in there and make your money for you, and then you're like, great, I have a great portfolio, and then it's gonna dwindle down to nothing.
Oh, I was under the impression you make money for people, so I wanted to keep as a thought.
I do, but they keep working.
It's interesting what you say. Many years ago, I think talking about women, father looking after it, husband looking after it, and then you have some painful stories about it. So many years ago, I had a lot of my colleagues up in shock because when I had a joint account with my wife, and they said, oh my goodness, man, you can't do that. She's going to have her own account and you're going to have a joint account. And I said, look, as far as I'm concerned, the joint account helps you in many different ways. It's about responsibility. I think you were talking about that. It's about responsibility. And number two is you also mentioned something about choice. Okay, we have a choice. What do I do by withdrawing that money, EPF? So do I actually squander it, or do I make good use of it? Because EPF still gives you good dividends, and so if I'm going to take it out, I better have a plan for it. And I think number three is, I think more importantly, I think like what you're talking about is, it's about thinking through the future. And very few people don't think through that.
And just to add on to that, it's financial literacy, right? Maybe some of us have grown up in homes where, one of your parents is really good at balancing the books, or really good at saving, or really having that habit in there. And some people don't have that. And so they don't realize all these things that are out there that they have to think about when it comes to their future.
Absolutely. I think staying frugal and saving money is within one's control, right? Let me ask you this question, Edly, because you are a millennial entering into the adult phase of life and you have lots of millennials following you on your blog. You have apps all the time on iPhone. So every time I tap the app on App Store on the iPhone, it says, well, $9.90 per month, $7.90 per month. And at one point, I just started clicking and I didn't realize you get charged on your credit card right away. And it ended up 200, 300 ringgit a month, and then I had to go back and keep canceling it. And I didn't know how to cancel it because if you renewed it for a year, then it goes for a year. So how do you, in your perspective, how do millennials think about consumer spending online? It's so easy.
Yeah, I think for them it's normal for them because they grew up in that era where it's normal to buy things online. So I think the question is how we could address this issue when it doesn't serve us, when these conveniences or online conveniences don't serve us in the long term. So we can go back to the question you had earlier about why do we swipe so fast on credit cards and we feel happy to buy it, but the pain only comes later when we have to pay for it. But I think first you have to understand that these companies behind these services, these conveniences, like Apple, Visa, MasterCard, all these banks, they employ tremendous amount of resources into psychologists and app creators to wire your brain in a certain way so that you purchase from them, so that you increase their bottom line, increase their revenue. So first is the awareness that your little tiny mind as an individual, you're going up against mega corporations who have invested tons of money into research and how to get you to do this. So I actually help my clients do this. We call this conversion rate optimization, where you want to make it as easy as possible for someone to purchase and keep purchasing, and as hard as possible for someone to stop purchasing or get off the plan. So first you have to understand that it's not in your favor, that the game is not in your favor. And so the best way, if you really want to make sure that you're not at a disadvantage, is to remove any unnecessary waste. If you think that you can't handle it, remove it from your life. And
remove it from your life, yeah. Well, thank you, Edly. Well, it's easier said than done.
Easier said than done.
Then done, yeah. Okay, now comes this important question. Everybody talks about financial freedom. And just before we were even going to get to that idea, Sarah already mentioned about look at the net worth. Oh boy, I'm going to need so much money in 30 years or 40 years and I don't have it. And I never realized it as a young person because I had people who kind of retired. They sold their big houses, they moved into small apartments because they didn't have a non-linear income. They only had one income, and that one income at that time was just the salary or the pension. So they kind of cut down their costs. But I think one of the things that, if I heard Sarah correct, I think Sarah said you have decided on a quality of life, and you should have this quality of life till your last days, and therefore we need some savings. So financial freedom. So what is the greatest benefit of having more money? And Morgan Housel says the highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up every morning and say, I can do whatever I want today. I don't need to do this because I need to do it. I can do whatever I want. And that's financial freedom. But to do that, you needed your savings. You needed to understand the power of compounding, and you need to make sure that you don't interrupt it unnecessarily, allow it. And there's something else that he says in this book. He says Warren Buffett is worth $85 billion, but 82.5 billion of those $85 billion was made after the age of 65. So which meant he had invested and allowed it to compound and grow for a long time. And I think that's the important lesson that he keeps insisting. And well, how do we kind of understand debt? Should we avail of the debt because it's easily available? You know, I have people calling me all the time and say, well, I see your credit card is free, could you just take some cash advance, I'll give you the interest. And you know, the interest rates are really cheap. It's about 2%, 3% per annum, so it's exciting. But you have to pay it back, right? You have to pay it back. So that's an issue. So how do you understand debt and leverage? How can you get an ordinary breadwinner to achieve financial freedom? What can we do about it? You talk about so much about ASM and ASB, and you compare it with the Maybankers are not very happy because you compare it with the Maybank benchmark. And you say the FD in Maybank doesn't even kind of pay back 2% or whatever. So, Edly, what do you think?
Yeah. So in terms of debt,
Leverage?
in general for me, I would try to avoid that as much as I can. And like you said,
So are you saying then we buy a car with cash even though the interest rate is only 2%?
I would buy a car cash, and because when we talk about that, like you said earlier, it's very easily accessible, right? And we think, oh, we have a lower interest rate, it's 2%, it's 3%. We put in ASB, we can make the spread. But what we don't consider in debt is how it makes us act, because we know we have car loan to pay, we know we have a mortgage to pay, we know we have student loans to pay. So debt, even though it's good debt, spread over time influences your behavior and makes you less comfortable with risk because you're already having these things trailing back behind you. So in my example, for me, maybe I have this bias because I'm younger. I want to be in the position where I can take as much risk as I can in the next 10, 15, 20 years. But if, let's say, if you were you were already stable, you had your assets, debt is cheap for you, then I think if you can make a well-educated decision on whether or not, if I can't pay this debt, if I default on it, do I have extra lumps of money to just...
Exactly, because default is painful.
And I mean, I will attest to the fact that I had student loan credit card debt coming out of university. And just exactly like what Ali said, it's like you get into this mode where it's kind of all you think about. And you kind of want to sweep it under the rug and you don't really want to look at it, and you're like, oh, I'm sure I can cover this, and it consumes you at some point. At some point it consumes you, and then you feel shameful about it, and then you go into this shame cycle of guilt, and it's hard to get out of it. And when I moved to Malaysia, I was worse off than the Pepsi head. I had $14,000 worth of student loan and credit card debt, and I came to Malaysia with like $200, $300. So equivalent 900 ringgit, okay? And at that point, I think after 3 months in, I was very lucky. I came just before Chinese New Year, and I was able to collect some ang bao to keep me, going for a couple months. But after 3 months, I was a victim of a smash and grab, and I couldn't even live off my credit cards, which I was thinking that's what I'll do for a little bit. And then I was on a cash diet. And that was the best thing for me because I was legitimately poor. And I just had to keep on paying off my student loans or credit card or consolidate all this stuff and just squash it. From that point on, that was a very big lesson that I never want to be in debt again. And to the point where, if I'm looking at finance, getting financing for my company, if we want to grow, if we want to scale, I'm always like, I don't want to owe anybody money. Like, that's just this fear that I have. And it's the behaviors, it's the shame, it's the idea that actually I'm not as who I say I am. I don't have this sense of freedom because I am bound by these, the shackles of debt.
Yeah, no, I think what you said was very true. I think the guilt takes over, doesn't it? Right? And you were talking about the cycle. But there's one thing that I think we always talk about, getting a good night's sleep. So I think Morgan Housel talks about this, and there are a lot of people out there who say, look, it's foolish to buy a car with cash because I could use the cash to generate far greater returns because the bank is only charging me 2.2% interest rates. But Morgan Housel says, look, I just get a good night's sleep. I'm happy. I don't have to think about making the payment. And if I forget to pay at the end of the month, I don't have to pay a penalty of 50 ringgit, whatever. And I want to do that. But I think it's also important to differentiate, I think, I'm going to throw this back to Edly, between personal and business debt. Would you actually differentiate personal and business debt?
Yeah, I think it's different for sure because one, a business is a separate entity, like legally, and as long as your business has cash flow and you're taking on good debt and you're utilizing the injection of money into something productive that you're confident will bring more cash flow and grow the business, then for sure. But personally, if you don't need a debt personally to grow your offerings, right? Maybe you need to spend some money on books, on courses to learn and upgrade yourself. Yeah. But I don't think you're in that position.
Because it's always about, I think it's important what you said, it's about cash flow. Mm. So if there isn't money coming in, don't think about spending money out. Yeah, and I think that's as simple as that. Well, good. Thank you so much for some of your ideas on the psychology of money. We talked about three things today. One, financial success is not about how smart we are, but it's how we behave with money. And number two, we all have different experiences and we need to understand that. And number three, I think everyone should have a goal, and the goal is to have financial freedom. And I think Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money, has 19 ideas, 19 short stories. And I think it's a valuable book because it tries to help us make sense of one of the most important resources that we all have, which is money. Now, we all like to have more money, but contentment is something that's very important. We all like to have a good quality of life, but it also depends on the cash that we bring in. And remember that you can only spend money that is yours, not money that is not yours. Well, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience, and thank you to my lovely panelists here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Your thoughtful ideas. Thank you so much, Terima kasih. Thank you.